Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. A joint survey by the Center for American Progress and Turkish survey research firm Metropol has found that 45% of Turkish voters plan to support President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the upcoming elections on Sunday.
According to the results of a survey conducted jointly by the Center for American Progress and Turkish survey research firm Metropol, 45% of Turkish voters plan to support President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the upcoming June 24th elections. The survey has asked voters, who will you vote for in the June 24th presidential election, and presented a list of candidates. The breakdown of the results are as follows. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, 45.2%, Muharrem İnce, 19%, Meral Akşener, 11.3%, Selahattin Demirtaş, 10%, Temel Karamollaoğlu, 1.2%, Doğu Perinçek, 0.3%, Undecided, 8.5%. In a potential runoff election between the current top two candidates, President Erdogan leads Republican People's Party (CHP) candidate Muharrem İnce by a 48% to 36% margin, with about 7% undecided. The survey also presented respondents with a battery of personal and political characteristics and asked them whether each one described President Erdogan well or not well, and asked the same set of items for Muharrem İnce for half the sample and for Meral Akşener in the other half of the sample. Erdogan received higher rankings on each of the items than either of his closest challengers in the presidential race. For the parliamentary elections, the survey has found that 46.2% will support the National Alliance, comprising of AKP and MHP, while 32.8% will support the People's Alliance, comprising of CHP, Good Party, Felicity Party, and Democrat Party. 0.5% of the respondents have said that they will vote for other parties, and 7% have said that they were undecided. Moreover, 54% of the respondents have said they believe that the upcoming elections will be conducted in a free and fair manner, while 46% disagreed. In terms of voters' concerns about the elections, 38% has said they are concerned that votes won't be counted fairly, and another 36% worry that the elections won't be conducted in a fair environment. According to the findings, 52% of the respondents think that the national economy is managed poorly by the current government, compared with 41% who feel it is managed well. More than three-quarters of the AKP voters believe the national economy is managed well, while 93% of CHP voters, 92% of HDP voters, and 61% of MHP voters feel it is managed poorly. In terms of foreign policy, 54% of the respondents have characterized the current relationship between the EU and Turkey as a poor relationship, while 38% believing it is an okay relationship, and only 8% feeling it is a strong relationship. By a 40% to 3% margin, Turks say they trust Russia more than they trust the United States, with 50% saying that they don't trust either one. Only 48% of the respondents believe that the country's recent policies towards Syria have been successful, compared with 50% who feel they have not been successful. Survey respondents were also asked what Turkey's top two policy priorities should be in Syria. A majority, 57%, say resettling Syrian refugees from Turkey to Syria should be one of the two top policy priorities, far outpacing ensuring Syria's territorial integrity in second place.
Joining us from Washington, D.C. tonight to answer our questions on their recent survey on the June 24th snap elections is Max Hoffman, who is the Associate Director of National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress. Good evening, Mr. Hoffman. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start talking about your survey, the joint survey of the Center for American Progress with the Turkish research survey firm Metropol. So for starters, can you give us some brief information about the scope and methodology of this survey?
Sure, yeah, happily. So we worked with Metropol, as you mentioned, which was the firm we selected after a competitive search among Turkish polling firms. And we've worked with them in the past on surveys and been very happy with the results. This particular survey was 2,534 Turkish voters across 28 provinces. It was weighted, and the sample was determined based on the Turkish Statistical Institute's standard model that most of the polling firms used. And it was 70%. It was all face-to-face used, and then 70% of the respondents were then called to verify the information that they had given. So we think that it's about as methodologically sound as you can get, and we're quite happy with it. It was conducted at the end of May and the beginning of June, so May 24th to June 4th, a pretty long polling period because there's so much polling in Turkey right now that it's difficult to get a full sample. So it has about a 2% margin of error at 95% level of confidence.
So let's start talking about your findings now. One of the most talked about aspects of these upcoming elections scheduled for Sunday is the possible second round scenarios about Akşener or İnce running against Erdoğan in a possible second round. So what do your findings suggest about these scenarios?
Well, it looks likely that there will be a second round based on not just our poll, but also the sort of general polling consensus. Our poll has Erdoğan coming in at 45%. That is, of course, short of what he would need to avoid a runoff. That's without undecided voters distributed. So he might pick up a few more percentage points from undecided voters. But what we've also seen, and we can return to undecided voters, is that block seems to be breaking heavily for both İnce, predominantly İnce, but also Akşener. So I don't anticipate Erdoğan picking up the 5% he would need to put this election to bed in the first round. So it looks likely that he will have to face a runoff. Now, our poll shows İnce in second place. Now, this next number is a little bit strange. It shows İnce at 19%. Now, that seems quite low, and it's because, again, undecided voters and people who say that they won't respond to the poll, things like that, are still included in that number. In reality, that number is probably in the mid-20s in our poll, and it seems to be moving in İnce's direction based on other polling I've seen it as well. So it looks like İnce will almost certainly be the second place finisher. Akşener is trailing İnce by 7 or 8 or maybe 9 points in most of the polls, sometimes more. So it looks likely that we'll see a second round runoff between Erdoğan and İnce.
So let's get back to the undecided voters. You also mentioned in your response that they were that we could return to them later in our conversation, as they're seen as a key bloc that will most possibly have a decisive impact on the results of this upcoming election. What can you tell us about how you have treated the responses of these undecided voters in your survey?
Yeah, well, we followed up with people who said they weren't sure, and we asked them, so if pressed, if forced to make a decision, who would you vote for in a runoff election? And what we saw was, or in the first round rather, what we saw was 40% said they would vote for İnce, 40% said they would vote for Akşener, and close to 20%, the remainder basically, said they would vote for Erdoğan. There were, of course, a few people saying other candidates like Demirtaş, So what it shows is that most of these undecided voters seem predisposed to choose an opposition candidate. We've also seen in other polls in the last few weeks that trend is playing out. In our poll, 8.5% were undecided. That's now down to about 4% in the latest polling. And of that 4.5% that have made up their mind, it's been heavily to İnce and the other opposition candidates. So it looks as if Erdoğan has this very strong base of about 44, 45%, and then he's picked up 3%, maybe likely to pick up 2 or 3% of undecided voters, but the bulk of those undecided voters look likely to choose an opposition candidate, which will mean this first round is very close, but based on the polling, Erdoğan looks to come up short.
And now let's get to election security, which seems to be a predominant theme in your research. So according to your findings, 54% of Turks have said that they believe the upcoming elections will be conducted in a, I quote, free and fair manner, while 46% have said that they disagree. Can you tell us a bit more about the profile of these respondents? Who is sure of these elections and who isn't?
Yes. Well, this one is a straightforward one, and it's just an entirely partisan matter. AKP voters, 90% of AKP voters believe the election will be free and fair. 87% of CHP voters disagree, saying that it will not be free and fair. The MHP is split. Now, this is MHP as determined by how the person voted in November 2015. So, of course, the MHP as it existed then is now divided itself. But it's about 50-50 among former MHP voters on how free or fair it will be. And then, predictably, HDP voters say 87% that it will not be free and fair. So it's entirely partisan. Basically, people who support Erdogan and the AKP feel that it's fair, and those who oppose them feel the opposite. We also asked about what the voters' primary concerns would be about the election. So followed up with the people who said it wouldn't be fair and said, well, what do you worry about? And 38% said the actual security of the ballot boxes, perhaps resulting from the new electoral law and the concerns around the April 2017 referendum. And then 36% said it was not the specific ballot box, it was the general atmosphere of unfairness. I assume referring to the government's control of media, the fact that the state of emergency is still in place, and the difficulty that municipal governments can cause for opposition people trying to campaign in their areas. So those were the primary concerns. A small minority said that they feared that the losers wouldn't respect the result. But that looks to be secondary to the concerns about the ballot box and the conduct of the election itself.
And what about the economy? What do your findings suggest about who thinks poorly of the economy and who doesn't?
Yes, well, the economy is by far the #1 issue for voters. That has fluctuated over time. At times, national security has been the #1 concern, but the economy is far and away the issue that most voters are worried about. Our poll shows that, we asked people how they feel the economy has been managed, and 52% said they felt it had been managed poorly, to 41% who said it had been managed well. That, again, was a very partisan matter, as you might expect. AKP voters said 76% that it was managed well, whereas the opposition felt heavily, overwhelmingly, that it had been managed poorly. I would say, though, that even among the AKP, there are signs of discontent about economic management. It's on most issues, if you ask AKP voters if the government is doing a good job, you get very strong support from them. But this showed a meaningful minority of, almost 20% who said, no, I'm an AKP voter, but I'm angry about how the economy is being managed. So that is interesting. It's perhaps not surprising given the weakening of the lira and the inflation problems that Turkey faces. We also did focus groups in Turkey over the last 4 months, and what came through very clearly in those focus groups was that average Turks don't see the top-line economic growth that the government talks about. They see inflation at 12% or higher. They see youth unemployment at over 20%. And what people said again and again was that both my wife and I work, we both have jobs, 60% of our income goes to rent, and the cost of food and basic goods continues to rise, and I don't know how long I can keep this going. So obviously this economic anxiety is the core issue of the campaign, and the real issue is whether it will translate into voting behavior among AKP constituents. Certainly the opposition is hammering away on those issues, although they have limited outlets to distribute that message.
And finally, what do your findings suggest about foreign policy issues? How do Turks, how do they approach different nations, including the EU and Russia, as put in the findings of the survey, and how do they approach such issues as the Turkish government's position on the Syrian question, for example?
Yeah, well, we polled a number of foreign policy questions. One of the classic questions is EU membership, and as has been the case for many years, the country is divided. About half want to be members of the EU, about half do not. There's a lot of hostility towards the European governments. Turks generally feel that it's the EU's fault that the process has stopped, and they resent the European Union threats of perhaps ending the accession process. On Russia and the United States, there's, we spoke early this year about our last poll, and basically Turkish attitudes towards the outside world are currently very hostile. They don't really feel very kindly towards any outside country except maybe Azerbaijan. or Qatar. But what's remarkable is we asked them, do you trust Russia or the United States more? And 50% said we don't trust either of them. So there's, again, this basic hostility. But overwhelmingly, the other, of those who said they trust one or the other, overwhelmingly they chose Russia. It was basically 41% said they trust Russia more, and just 2 or 3% said the United States. So there is there's this deep hostility towards the U.S. and most of the U.S. And Russia is making headway in Turkey and seems to be gaining new fans and friends. On Syria, the interesting thing is we asked what Turkey's goals should be in Syria. Whether they should be resettling the refugees or fighting Daesh or fighting PKK-PYD or fighting the Assad regime. And overwhelmingly, Turks said that resettling the refugees was the #1 priority. 55% said that should be the first goal. I think that maybe is different than some of the messaging that gets through, at least in the West, about what Turkey's goals are in Syria. And we asked, as a follow-up question, there's this deep hostility towards the presence of Syrian refugees in Turkey. We said, well, what should the approach be towards the refugees? Should they become citizens and stay and pay taxes? Should they continue as guests, effectively the status quo? Should they be returned to Syria no matter what? Or should they be returned to Syria to safe zones that Turkey creates? And that last option, that they should be returned to safe zones Turkey creates, was the most popular. 45% supported that. But the second most popular was that they should go back to Syria no matter what, 33%. So between them, 78% of Turks want the Syrians back. They don't want them to remain in Turkey. But most Turks want to at least create safe zones for them to return to Syria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman, for joining us tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Aylan. Take care.
On Thursday, the main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP's presidential candidate Muharrem İnce, vowed to transform Turkey as he rallied hundreds of thousands of people in the western city of Izmir in one of the biggest opposition rallies in years. Announcers at the rally said that 2.5 million people were present at the event. Though it was not possible to independently confirm attendance figures, the large crowds were seen as a concrete evidence of how strongly he has been able to galvanize the opposition. Many analysts believe Muharrem İnce could force the president into a runoff on July 8th, although Erdogan remains the favorite to win a second term, even if he requires a second round. The final rally of İnce's campaign will be held in Istanbul on Saturday, and his supporters expect 2 million people in the mass meeting. Polls also indicate that the ruling AKP could lose its majority in the 600-seat assembly. This week, for the first time in his 16-year tenure, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke about the possibility of a coalition government after the June 24th early elections. His coalition partner, Nationalist Movement Party, MHP's chairman Devlet Bahçeli, also said Turkey could call another election if their alliance cannot form a majority in the parliament after Sunday's vote. Since recent changes to Turkey's election law and allegations of fraud in last year's referendum raised concerns about a fair vote, 4 opposition parties and a number of NGOs announced that they will deploy more than 500,000 monitors and volunteers at ballot boxes across the country to prevent fraud. They have also formed an alternative platform to count, validate, and announce the number of votes to the public on the election day.
Turkey and US soldiers have started independent patrols in northern Syria following the roadmap agreement on Manbij.
After the roadmap of the YPG withdrawal from Manbij agreement reached between the Turkish and US officials, Turkish and US soldiers started independent patrols in the northern Syria along the border separating Turkish-controlled areas from Manbij. According to Turkish military sources, the Turkish armed forces started its second patrolling mission. The statement stated that the Turkish armored military vehicles patrolled around the Saju River, which separates Manbij and Jarablus. The Turkish army conducted its first patrolling mission around Manbij earlier in the week. In line with the roadmap, the US forces also patrolled around the town of Dadat. The roadmap agreement reached between Turkey and the United States endorsed a tentative deal to overcome months of dispute over the town, in which the YPG forces would withdraw from Manbij and the two allies would jointly maintain stability in the city. According to US Department of State spokesperson Heather Nauert, the YPG forces have also agreed to withdraw from the city. We've agreed as a part of the overall roadmap in dealing with Manbij that the YPG will depart Manbij. We're continuing to work with our NATO ally Turkey on a common way forward in Manbij, Nauert said. Meanwhile, despite the US Senate decision to block the procurement of the F-35 jets to the Turkish government, Turkey officially received its first F-35 fighter from the contractor Lockheed Martin. Turkey has allocated a significant amount of financial sources to this partnership and has provided an enormous contribution to the program from the very beginning. Plus, the joining of the Turkish industry has an important impact on the cost effectiveness of this program. Turkish Defense Industries Deputy Undersecretary Serdar Demirel told reporters during the official delivery ceremony.
3 people were killed and 9 were injured in an armed clash during an election tour by a delegation from the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, in Şanlıurfa last week.
3 people were killed and 9 were injured in an armed clash during an election tour by a delegation from the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, in the Suruç district of the southeastern province of Şanlıurfa on June 14th. According to the Doğan news agency, the delegation led by AKP MP Halil İbrahim Yıldız was visiting local shopkeepers in Suruç Cumhuriyet neighborhood ahead of the June 24th elections. A group of shopkeepers initially engaged in a heated argument with the AKP delegation, which eventually turned violent. Guns and clubs were used in the ensuing clash, reports said. 3 people, including a brother of MP Yıldız, were killed, and 9, including 4 other brothers of Yıldız, were reportedly injured. On the same day, main opposition Republican People's Party CHP leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu urged the government to investigate and eliminate the incidents. As a response, Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım said, all of these findings will be evaluated and the truth will be revealed, and added, I hope that this was only petty crime and there is nothing political behind it. If there is something political behind it, the consequences will be different. After the incident became public, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan claimed that the shopkeepers were PKK sympathizers and that they were the ones who had attacked first. Erdogan accused the HDP for the incident and said, this incident is an obvious example of the PKK and the HDP strategy to grow through the blood of Kurds. HDP, meanwhile, published a formal notice stating that they are warning their voters not to fall into any provocations and are expecting the government to conduct a transparent and fair investigation.
The killing of a puppy whose feet had been cut off sparked a countrywide outrage last week.
The horrible killing of a puppy has sparked outrage in Turkey last week. The puppy was found on June 13th by a passerby in a wooded area in the Sapanca district of the western province of Sakarya, fighting for its life as 4 of its feet had been cut off. Locals hospitalized the dog, which succumbed to its injuries 2 days later, despite an emergency operation in Istanbul. Amid public outcry, local officials announced that the culprit, the operator of a grader who worked in the area, had been found and was arrested by a court order on June 17th on charges of killing the dog. The operator of the grader has denied charges for the horrible killing of the puppy. I was filling potholes and cleaning grass on the streets. I saw 3 or 4 dogs, but I did not hurt them. I am not guilty, he reportedly told the police. The Turkish law does not stipulate jail terms for crimes against stray animals, but harming a dog with an owner could result in jail over charges of damaging property. Parliament has currently come up with a new ministerial bill that includes more severe punishments in cases of violence against stray animals. After the killing of the puppy, the government had announced that the bill would be prioritized following the June 24th elections. Presidential candidates Muharrem İnce of the CHP and Meral Akşener of the Good Party also condemned the incident on Twitter.
Now we'll take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
World-famous British group and forerunner of trip-hop music Massive Attack is back in Turkey, performing this time on Zorlu PSM stage on Tuesday. The band has won numerous music awards throughout their career, including a Brit Award, winning Best British Dance Act, 2 MTV Europe Music Awards, and 2 Q Awards. They have released 5 studio albums that have sold over 11 million copies worldwide. Plevneli Gallery will host Can Sayınlı's Rugs and Kilims exhibition until the 21st of July. Sayınlı's colorful rug work, including Muzaffer Sarısülük, Breaking News, Mother and Whistleblowers, not only remind us of a forgotten recent past, but provide the opportunity to seize those moments we may have overlooked. Learning the artistry from the master kilim weavers, Sayınlı has passed the art of rug work on to British artist Charlie Swan, whom he had met in early 2017 in a group exhibition. The two artists now work on collaborative projects. The Rugs and Kilims exhibition will also feature hand-woven kilims from the first year of their collaboration.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.